We are welcoming Dr. Samantha Hart to Talking Addiction and Recovery podcast. Thanks for joining.
You're welcome. Finally, we made it.
Yeah, this is great. I've read your book a while ago, which we're going to talk about, which is Breaking the Circuit, How to Rewire Your Mind for Hope, Resilience, and Joy in the Face of Trauma. Before we dive into this, can you give the audience a little bit of a background about what you do?
Sure. I am a speaker, author, and coach, and I'm the founder of Strong Heart Fitness, which is an integrative wellness center for the mind, body, and spirit. And I would say fundamentally at the heart of what I do is I help people heal, whether that is body or spirit, or typically a combination of both, and consciously create a life that they love.
That's great. I love how you capture that. Sometimes I hear people go through like a bio with a little bit of a background, but you really sort of approach it with like your foundation, your approach, and overall belief. So that's
I've
great.
worked
I
I've
like
worked
that.
on that quite a bit since
Yeah.
once upon a time I was just running a private practice as a physical therapist, and my pitch for who I was and what I did was really dialed in. And then I made a huge pivot into becoming an author and a speaker and more of a transformational coach. And there was a long period of time where I had no idea how to answer a question like that. So it feels really good also on my end to sit where I am, in this hard-earned seat of becoming a more refined version of myself and being able to express it. So I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah. So I have to ask, how did you go from physical therapist
Mhm.
to working in this area of like addiction, betrayal, trauma, like all this type of stuff. 'Cause to me, I went through physical therapy when I had shoulder surgery. I had a bone spur removed, and it was tough. But one thing I realized my biggest takeaway was really having to relearn how to um work and move my body and to listen to it and to understand it. The frustrations of I could do this all the time, and now I have to really slow my mind down and really think about the mind, the body connection. So I'm very curious how your background of physical therapy then landed you into more of the work you do now.
Yeah. Well, it was progressive, and the thing that, if I had to extract the truest part of the answer to that question, it's that my knowing, my intuition continued to nudge me further than the place that I was in. And so the place I was in out of graduate school was, how could this be the field that I worked so hard to enter, where I'm just chasing down symptoms and never ever getting to the source of the problem? How could this be the career that I insert myself inside of? And what is a truer version of that for me? So after working for someone who had a business model that was one-on-one, truly not clinics that say that and you have two or three patients at a time. I never in my career have seen more than one patient at once. I am so
Wow.
proud of that fact. So I got good at what I did. And then I was still very, very broke. And I was like, there has to be a version of this work where I can get paid in alignment with what I value myself at, and I can help people at a deep level. So that was when Strong Heart Fitness was born, which was a cash-based whole body, whole person practice. The spiritual side of things was always there in the sense that I had an hour with my patients. And I mean, good luck in our healthcare industry getting an hour with any practitioner. So I really got to learn about the landscape of their lives way outside of their physical pain and all the elements that were contributing to it. So I was paying very, very close attention, and I'm sober. I'm 16 years sober. And so I'm attending 12-step meetings and I'm working through tremendously difficult things in sobriety. And I can't help but notice the parallels in the spiritual malady we discuss in traditional AA and these ordinary folks in my practice. These things that we say our alcoholic tendencies, I'm not so convinced are. I think they're human
Mm,
tendencies. Except that with a normal person who doesn't suffer from addiction, maybe it isn't as dire as quickly. Maybe it's just a slow, repetitive, insidious strain on their nervous system and their connective tissue. But these people were suffering from people pleasing and toxic codependency and hyperproductivity. And just as you said about your own experience, you weren't just confronted with the pain of the injury and the rehab process. You were confronted with everything that surrounded it. Wait a minute. What do you mean I can't just do this? What do you mean I can only do that? What do you mean it's
hmm
going to take me 6 months before I go back to the gym and lift the weight? What do you and the confronting of a collapsed identity and the hyper vigilant exerciser that identifies as an athlete who now has to completely stop. And who are you in the face of that? All of those things are spiritual in nature. And they are going to get in the way of the person's physical healing process. Whether it is a direct line of being in the way, meaning I am so sick inside of this codependent relationship that I am in a constant state of stress and chronic inflammation. And so this knee pain that I hired Samantha to get rid of literally cannot get better even if she curates the perfect program. Or it's not that bad, but I'm so codependent that even though I know I should be doing this program that I paid a lot of money for, I'm really just going to care for this person instead of myself because that's where I derive a sense of worthiness from. And so that program that I should have been doing for the last 2 weeks, I only did one time. And so I'm not really any further along in my physical healing process. No matter how you cut it, it was interfering and I couldn't unsee it.
mm.
And then I lost my sister Jessica to a drug overdose on March 13th of 2022. And I I literally have three memories of that day. The finding out in the Austin airport and dropping to the floor and wailing. Actually, I might only have two memories. But there is a third that my husband has reflected back to me that I don't remember. The second memory was when I got to my house in LA and was packing my bag and sobbing, and my kids were asking me what was wrong and where I was going, and having to try to express in an age appropriate way what was going on. But my husband, who was with me in the airport, said that on that day on the airplane, I turned to him and said, I'm writing a fucking book, just like that. I don't remember saying that,
Wow.
but I meant it because I think that was the moment where the stake went in the ground. And I just said, my sister, this beautiful, seemingly successful lawyer with a beautiful house in the suburbs and two children and a lawyer for a husband, had it all, right? Externally, was so sick spiritually that it fucking killed her. And I'm so tired of watching the people I love die. And whether it is a slow spiritual death where I just watch the light go out in their eyes because they're no longer connected to the essence of who they are, or it's an untimely, horrific death like my sister's, I'm sick of it. And I'm going to do something about it. So when I wrote my book, I really did not understand what was happening, what I was actually starting to do, and who I was becoming, right? The person you're sitting and talking to right now, I didn't know she was being birthed, but my book started as a memoir because I was sure after that loss that I had enough big stories to tell. where if I could just extract the lesson and let the reader know that they're not alone and they don't need to feel ashamed, that that was worth its weight in gold. But as I wrote, it became so clear to me that the thing that saved my life in recovery was working the 12 steps in a modern and trauma-informed way at 5 years sober in a marital crisis. Because prior to that, I was also very spiritually sick, even though I was physically abstinent. And I was like, that's what this book is. This book is my attempt to bring the 12 steps to the world in a way that is current with what we now know in 2025 about addiction, recovery, sobriety, psychology, childhood trauma. And so today, when I can answer you and say, I help people heal their bodies and their spirits and consciously create a life they love, I mean that. I have always been a really good practitioner who's listening and paying attention, but it is a next level experience because I now use the 12-step framework with the person on any pain point that they're navigating in their life as a spiritual framework for becoming free from suffering.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. The format of your book, I really liked how at the end of each one it gets into like this an alternative look at the step. And you give this like reaction one and reaction two. And I really thought that was great because you take, this your story in your life and what's going on, but then readers get to this step and they kind of able to look at like how this goes, then how there's an alternative um way to do it. And I like reaction because when I always look at
Mm.
it, well, what happened? I reacted. Well, what I don't know. And I didn't think about it. I reacted to it. And you kind of outline like how this happens. How did you come up with that way of structuring the book where you get into that? Here's an alternative look at it, and then here we go with reaction one, here's reaction two, and then you also end with a lot of um you do some wrap ups and you have some questions, some steps that people can like take to go through and walk through this stuff. How did you kind of mold that into this is about your story, this is about things you've gone through, but then also this isn't just about me, this is about how
Yeah.
to include all this. How did you put all that together?
Yeah. I mean, I writing a book is such a wild process, and I knew nothing about authorship. And so as I gathered chapters together and then a book proposal and got sort of closer to the memoir aspect of the book, I started submitting to publishing companies. And, the academic in me that wants that prestigious, publishing company that everyone's heard of to back them, submitted to all those places. And they were like either not responding at all or writing back and going, this is really interesting, but without a larger platform, we don't see a way forward, right? Which, what does that mean? We can't monetize off of you, at least not yet. Maybe come back when you're more famous or something, right? And I was like, well, this book is coming out regardless. And I'm not waiting for approval from anybody or validation. I'm already aware this book can save lives. So what does that mean for me moving forward? So I kept writing. And then when I sort of poked my head back out for submission, I did more research on the landscape of the publishing industry, and it turns out that there's this whole middle ground, much like the music industry has now morphed, and you don't just need a big record deal from a big executive. You can put out your own music, you can be with an indie label. So there's hybrid publishers. Now you have to have a lot of discernment because there are people who will say, "Oh, we'll help you write your book, we'll help you," who don't care at all, who don't have the right distribution channels, who haven't done it before, who are not professional editors, and they're just trying to take your money. So once I understood there was this vast hybrid space, I did a lot of research. When I found the players who were very highly regarded and who'd been around for a while, and I thought, okay, this model is inverse. I'm going to be paying in to the design and the structure and the integrity of this book by having a team instead of getting an advance, which would be awesome, right? But on the flip side, whatever money I spend is money I have to be totally fine that I invested into my dream, my vision, my book. And whatever I get to make, I have to make it back, but the royalties are vastly in my favor as the author. So the model is inverse, but in a good way if you're willing to pay in to some extent to the design of your book, right? So I submitted, and I ended up working with a publishing company called Greenleaf, who's been in the hybrid space for 25 years, really well respected. It was in working with them that the clarity around what are we doing inside of each of these chapters came from. And I remember thinking, okay, if this is going to be about a modern version of the steps, then I don't know if it's enough to share a story from a really long time ago that's baked in my history and my trauma because the reader may or may not relate to it. And I also don't know if it's enough to just put step one, two, three, four, five, all the way to 12 at the end with a slightly modern spin on it. Because I'm now 16 years sober, and there's 1,000 examples of the ways that I use step one versus four versus 10 at any given moment of the day. And I need the reader to finish each chapter and be able to deeply relate to at least one thing. So that means I need to talk about powerlessness and acceptance and surrender in a traffic jam, not just in a house where I had a bipolar mother who self-medicated, because I know they can relate to the traffic jam,
Absolutely.
right? And so I think that was the real tug because I remember the editorial team being like, "Why are you writing this book?" And I'm like, "It wasn't because I have to for my healing, because it's cathartic, because I want my kids to have it one day. It was the answer was because I want to help as many people as possible. Once that became the vision and the goal, that changed the structure of each chapter. Because am I going to help as many people as possible by just telling my story? I'm not sure. To the people who've been through similar things, maybe. But I've had so many people say, even just from the title of my book, what if I don't have trauma though? What if I don't identify as having grown up with trauma? Like, is this book going to help? To which I say, look at the landscape of your life right now. Just look at the major pillars: finance, health, personal relationships, family. If you are disgruntled, dissatisfied, if there is an ache, a lack of fulfillment in any one of these places, you're not in alignment in the way you know you want to be or should be in one of those places, there is work to do. And this book can help. So you may not identify with capital T trauma, even lowercase trauma. You may not understand, but our worlds shape our perspective. And the meanings we give to the things that happen to us, big or small, shape the decisions we make and the life that we have. And if we're not satisfied, we deserve to be. We deserve to be deeply fulfilled and congruent with who we are, who we truly, truly are. And so how do we get really honest about that? And what is the framework to help us get back in touch with capital S self? And that's what the book is meant to do, regardless of what you've been through.
Yeah, some of the things I underlined weren't really like, oh, I guess this is just for people with alcohol or who had parents with mental health or dealt like some of these things I think I just want to share some because I love sharing some of the things that I highlight in
Love
books
that. Yeah.
with people. You know, I loved someone who worked and taught and did a lot of counseling with anger management. I really love chapter 4 of interrogating my anger. You know, part of that is anger is not the enemy many of us have been conditioned to believe it is. Um, I
Mm.
really appreciate that. I love the one about the buttons. You talked about what was the phrase of like the person who installed them or
Nobody
something.
pushes our buttons like our family because they're the ones who installed them.
Yeah, so there's so many. things that when I looked at them, as we remind ourselves that we would rather be free than right. We practice asking for a new perspective and a new attitude. I love this one. This one I really think is not talked about enough. Many of us have been here with the people we care about the most. Often, however, we don't follow up. We don't repair the rupture. But wouldn't it be so much better if we did? We don't talk enough about
Mm.
ruptures in relationships and connections. I think about it all the time because like as a therapist, I know there can be ruptures in sometimes the relationship. Sometimes I may have said something in the therapy session, it might have missed the mark or they might have
Mm.
um so I often look at all these different things that like I don't know who this wouldn't apply to. Like this is whether I'm working with someone with substance use, with mental health, if it's a family, if it's a couple, if it's someone who's just seeing me, or if it's someone who's in relationships or dealing with other things. Like these are all things that I it's hard for a reader to not think that something in here would apply to them. Like I think it's really hard for someone to just read a story and then be like, well, I mean, I don't have this issue with alcohol. I guess this is not me. So I think you did a great job
Mm.
of bringing a lot of that together. And in the examples you give, like traffic and other things where also people can relate to some of those things easier than some of the really big challenging ones that could come with a lot of like defensiveness and avoidance where like if I can get you to see it in an area where it's like, okay, that's every day and that's a little bit of step forward. I thought that was really great to approach it that way.
Mm. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm curious with another thing I thought brought people together, and this is where the title comes in, is breaking the circuit. Because to me, again, like we're all humans. We all have, mind, body, spiritual connection. Like that's how we're already, regardless of the mental health or the substance use or whatnot. Like um, we are all this way. When you talk about breaking the circuit, how do you want readers to understand like what the circuit means? Like kind of as we try to educate people on like, brain body connection, all these types of things. You go from reading like a book that really dives into everything about the body versus also trying to break it down for readers who are not going to come with like a background of science or psychology or physical therapy, all that. So how do you want readers to understand the whole idea of the circuit?
Yeah, it's a cool question. I don't think anyone's asked me that. I always say that my work is this really lovely combination of where science meets the soul. So if I take that as the springboard to answering this question, I would say scientifically, both in how we move and how we think, act, behave, cope, there are literal neural circuits all throughout the brain and body that make things run the way they do. And as a PT, so much of what I was doing, let's say someone came in with knee pain, and I discovered that so much of their movement pattern was lending itself toward overloading the knee. So it made a lot of sense that at some point the knee would start barking. So they had these feedback loops between brain and body back up to the brain that were telling them, in order to squat, this is what you do, and you do it on autopilot. And you do it like this, and the knees are way past the toes, and the knees are collapsed inward toward each other. And here I am coming in, creating a consciousness around the movement pattern, showing it to them on video, educating them, and slowly disrupting that feedback loop, giving it less attention and energy and reinforcement, and then rigorously practicing a new behavior to create a new feedback loop. So I'm literally breaking the circuitry of one movement pattern and creating a new one. It is exactly the same in the emotional and spiritual realm. When I think about why I am still here and my sister's not, the only difference is that I practiced new ways of feeling my very big, scary feelings longer and with more rigor than she did, enough to break the circuitry that kept pulling me back towards alcohol and cocaine and any other numbing technique. I reinforced these new things long enough where they became the pattern instead. And so if we take away the science and you just look at your life and think of things that you do all the time that maybe you've said to yourself, why do I do that? Why do I always do that? We all have that, even small little things like fidgeting with your fork and knife or ritualistic things, some OCD behavior or funny, strange habits or superstitions or ways that we say things to ourselves. There's so many things that are so small and insidious that we just do. And who knows the combination of where those things came from, how deeply and early on they were rooted into our nervous system. But without having to think or visualize about neural circuits and science, you just look at behavior. You look at self-talk. You look at the things that are just on repeat and you go, that's a circuit. That's just a circuit going round and round and round. And if that circuit becomes painful enough, where it wakes you up from a sleeping state, you have an opportunity to go, how do I make a new one? And in the making of a new one and the abstaining of the old harmful one, you then break it. And this is the process of rewiring.
And I think too, like when you say that, you 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 just articulated it so well. I wonder, do we give ourselves and others realizing like this does take time? Like because I think about it when it comes to my surgery, and I had to go in surgery, recovery from it before I could even move it. And then it was the physical therapy, and that started at one point before I could even get to like there was no like, okay, this arm should be good by tomorrow. Like you're like, but when you talk about like self-talk, right? Someone may have said the worst things about themselves for so long. And then all of a sudden to be like, well, let me teach you positive self-talk. And then we go through some of that. And I just think it's unrealistic to think that that person's just gonna then have all the greatest things that they're gonna say about themselves going forward. Like it has been years of this it's been hammered in to the point where it becomes so solidified, right? Like it becomes so strong, but then to chip away at it, to break it, like you said, it's not just the one stroke of the hammer that does it. It's been the repetitive, keep on doing it. This took time, that this just did not happen overnight. And I think some areas we are accepting of that and understanding. I think that when it comes to some of the emotional stuff and the stuff that goes on cognitively, we don't have as much patience towards people's recovery, or that this will take time. So I'm curious, as I just thought of all that and said all that, um, where are you with that when it comes to like then breaking the circuit, that sometimes we need to give ourselves more grace, and others, that this is not going to be you just learn this and now it's going to be different. I've changed. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's such an important point, and I do talk a lot about that when I get into the initial process of self-forgiveness when I was at 5 years sober and what that really looked like, how painfully I was walking through life. Forget about when I, on autopilot, just took the critical part of me's words as gospel. But now, in the space where I was paying attention to the way I spoke to myself and how painful it was, and trying to interrupt it and birth a compassionate version of that, and the rigor and frequency that I had to practice, It was so exhausting. It was so painful, and it took a long time. So I think it's so important in the land of quick fixes and instant gratification to be very, very transparent about that. The thing about if there is a blessing to time sober, because I will say, as you know from my book, but for the people that don't, my first sponsor who saved my life, who had, seemingly no chance of ever being in danger of a relapse, 22 years of doing the deal and really seemingly overcoming a hopeless state, did relapse and did die. He killed himself. So what good is 22 years? And is it better than 22 days? And is there actually a difference? In the realm of breaking deeply ingrained circuitry, the blessing of time sober today for me is because I'm living a conscious life. That means I am aware when old patterns kick back up, and they kick back up all the time. My most favorite is what can I double down on to control right
Mm.
now? Because I feel powerless and terrified. I can, because I'm awake and aware, either choose to reinforce the old pattern, but I know how painful it's going to be because I've had enough time sober trying to do that and failing. Or I can go, here it is again. Here it is again. What do you want to do with it? Do you want to reinforce that old pattern and try to control and manage and manipulate the world around you and the people, places, and things in it so you feel a temporary sense of safety? Or do you want to lean in to this uncertainty, to this grief, and see who you become on the other side and try to reinforce this new brave pathway of being able to sit with yourself? Which one? And the gift of time sober is that my threshold for discomfort has radically decreased, which means I'm a lot less likely today to choose the old pattern and reinforce it. And I'm much more willing, because I have a stack of evidence of how good it gets, to continue to try to break the old circuitry and form the new.
And I think where a lot of people sometimes, because I like the way you put that, because when you look at your book and how it's structured, it's almost like, this happens, and it's either, we go back to reaction one, which is very um familiar, and it's been how we become wired, or there's reaction two, which is like the newer way to respond to it. But I think some people get stuck because they're hoping for that it doesn't get activated again, or like they don't get tempted again. To me it's like, here it is, so here's this option, which was the old way. This is the other option. I think some people are looking for, or sometimes waiting for some magic to happen, right? To that there is no more temptation, or there is no more being triggered or activated. But as you were saying, like, this hasn't just gone away. Your awareness towards it is increased, so you're more aware of when it's happening. Your bandwidth for how to deal with it, but then also that with the time you've been given of how to not go back to the old way and how you've been able to reinforce the new way. I just think some people still kind of are waiting for that door number three, which is this just doesn't happen anymore,
Mm.
versus like realizing I could be sober for X amount of years and I can still face this again. This doesn't erase all of that. So I really
Mhm.
appreciate how you have that transparency, because Um, there's a lot of stories like that where, someone's gone many years, and it doesn't mean that there was any stepping away, but there's just always, even even with the challenges that will lie ahead, even with the things that will activate us or trigger us and the buttons, that there is still a way to use the new way to build the circuits to handle it and all that. So I really appreciate that part of it.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe to the people who want the third door, want to walk through it and it just be done. It just be done. Ah, I can't fully speak to that. And I'm just not sure as we're here on Earth and we're going to continue to experience new things, new difficulties, new traumas that are going to be temporary setbacks that will be tests ultimately of old pattern versus new, whether we ever can fully transcend those deeply formative years and our hardwiring. I think to some extent we're always coming up against that. That said, listen, are there people in recovery who are like, the obsession to drink and use has been removed, and then it feels like a lightning bolt, like a white light experience, and for however many years they're sober, they've not once. Now, does that mean they're not acting out in very similar behavioral slips that just don't look like snorting cocaine, but they look like using somebody for sex, love, validation? You know, I, in my
Even
experience,
people pleasing and all that type of stuff. Like, yeah, yeah.
because it without those things surfacing, what work would we have here to do? Honestly, if we were so set free from our inherent nature and the things we've had to come up against that have been trials and tribulations, and we just eased our way through, what would we have to learn? And what would the lessons of our lives turn us toward? I don't know a world that looks like that. I just know that at every year sober, there is a new level of awareness and consciousness. There is also a new level of healing on the things that I thought were probably already healed up. There's just a new level to get to, a new level of understanding, a new level of compassion, a new level of insight, a new level of ability to now help somebody else who's stuck in an insidious place of suffering that doesn't look like an obvious cocaine addiction. That has been my experience, that it's never gone, it's just shape shifting, and that the call to action is to deepen your healing, is to continue to go, what is this trying to reveal to me that needs my attention internally? And what does it look like to love on that differently today and deeper today than I have in the past?
Yeah, very profound. I mean, I think sometimes we've one of the books that I read that stood out to me for the longest time was Pain, the Gift Nobody Wants.
Mm.
Um, I thought the subtitle was great. It was Life Without Pain Can Really Hurt. Um, I
Ah.
thought that was like one of the most creative titles of a book ever. But that's like that's where I think some people, and we kind of like look at recovery and things like that, where recovery isn't just like taking away something that just is gone on or been bad or hurtful or tough or challenging, but this is also about like learning to live a different way, a new way going forward, that this isn't just like the end of a journey or a destination, but that this is more than that, which is because life is still going to have, when I talk with people about, what do they look at as things that could potentially be like a threat to their recovery or their sobriety. And I'll tell you, most of the time, those aren't the things that come true. Like I hear like I lost someone so close to me, and sometimes I hear that they've experienced a loss, but they didn't go back to drinking or they didn't gamble again. But sometimes it's like the buildup of these little things that have gone on with like the daily relationships or like the daily stressors of some things. And to me, I'm thinking as we talked, like it's the old wiring that's now building up again, which then something all of a sudden then really sort of overloads it, and then this is what happens. So even when someone, the great thing about your book is that even when we're talking about all these issues of like addiction, trauma, mental health, and relationships, that this is stuff that can apply way beyond that, even when you do get to moments of sobriety and recovery, that this could be 5, 10, 20 years, wherever you are, that these things are going to be applicable wherever your journey is. It's not like at a certain point it stops and then, or it starts and then stops. This is like a forever thing that can be applied, the steps that you've talked about and shared. So I think that's where a lot of audience members can
Mm,
learn from it, is that it's depending on where you are, what you've gone through, where you're at with it, there's things in here that can be applied and quite effective.
mm. Yeah, something that just came up when you were talking. I'm on track now to, be a paid public speaker, and it's a very exciting career path for me. I'm extremely passionate about it. And so I shot a talk that I submitted, and it was a version of a keynote that I haven't quite given yet. But the way it started was, I know most of you probably think that addiction is about substance abuse, and on the surface, it is. But addiction is actually about safety. And to that point, and back to the question before this part of our conversation, so long as we are living here on earth, we are vulnerable to hurt, to be hurt by a friend, a lover, to lose the people we love, to have our children get bullied at school, or God forbid something worse. We are vulnerable by act of being alive. Anything can happen at any moment, which means that our sense of safety can be threatened at any moment. And it is our natural nature to defend and protect. And if you have a history of defending and protecting with maladaptive coping behaviors, you might just go back and do that, even though there are other ways of feeling safe. And the book and the step work as a more modern framework and a trauma-informed framework is an attempt at giving people something to help return them back to a sense of safety, which for the rest of their lives is going to be applicable.
Yeah, I think that makes that people who are struggling with like, addiction and stuff like that, they will feel seen and heard when you say that.
Mhm.
I I think that's something that we still need to help others understand what's going on. Because I think most people would think like that addiction's causing harm and it's hurting, and it like to think of safety is like not how we normally have that conversation. But also two things can be true, right? Like to the person who's seeking safety, but also like it can come with harm as well. But I think that's a really great point for people who may struggle to understand some of those things about um, addiction, that there is this part of safety that's playing a role in it, and we have to understand that as a human, like that is we are hardwired for uh, keeping ourselves safe. So I'm really glad you shared that, because I don't think that gets talked about enough
Mm,
with people. So I
thank you.
really appreciate that.
Yeah.
All right, so I have one more question before I ask you for kind of like a final takeaway for our audience members. And I think too it really comes down to is I really liked our talk about being patient, because uh, this is such a system that has been working for so long with so many factors, things that were going on in someone's life, or it could have been since they were incredibly little and just reinforced and all that. And as we talked about being patient with people and giving people grace for what this process does, what message would you have for listeners as to how someone can kind of begin to break that circuit like today or even like tomorrow? Like what sort of action steps to sort of begin that process of breaking the circuit, knowing that like it won't be some magical do this and tomorrow we shut it down and like, but where would be um some starting points from your work, from what you've done with others, that if people started in this direction, it's a good place to begin.
Hmm. When I began to really heal, the initial step required, which was birthed out of being in so much pain, right? Was to become deeply aware. So, and I think there's an asterisk after that because how many times do we hear that, right? Like awareness, you need awareness. If if we are, as I said earlier, discontent, in pain, in heartbreak, in suffering, and we take that as a signal to pay attention. I need to pay attention to this. I need to give it attention. There is tension here. It needs my attention. Then, then you're now not operating from a sleeping state. You can't break a circuit when you're asleep. You can't break a circuit when you're on autopilot. Pain tends to be a circuit breaker. So don't take pain as it having to be crisis and dire. It can look like, man, this job is not it. I mean, I probably I gotta stay for like at least a year, but I need the money. Okay, pain can look like that. Don't turn away from your pain. Stay awake. And the asterisk is, how can you have compassionate curiosity?
I like that.
What it's trying to teach you. Because if you're just awake, then what? Now it's almost harder than when you were asleep. But if you're awake to the reality that you're actually not okay in this job, you know this is not it for you, but you have no idea what to do next. How can you meet that knowing with compassionate curiosity? Why do I feel that way? What is it about this job that isn't in alignment? What is it? Not, oh, I have to stay. Oh, what's wrong with me? Why did I choose it? That's not compassionate and it's not curious. But if it's, oh, because I don't get to be creative, and that's such a big part of what makes me feel like me. This job doesn't actually give me that space. All of a sudden, you start to come up with a bunch of reasons why it doesn't feel right.
Mm.
When you have those reasons, you have a springboard to eventually take radical responsibility in a direction that feels more aligned. Okay, I get now deeply why this doesn't feel good. How can I take one tiny step in a direction that does feel more like these things that I know are so important to me? Because if you're doing that, then staying at that job for a little longer is a completely different experience, and you're not trapped. That's what I would say. So awareness, pay very close attention to your pain. It just like, your anger is trying to tell you something, interrogating that, interrogate your discontent
Mm.
with compassionate curiosity.
Yeah. I love that. Especially the awareness is key because we always talk about awareness for a lot of things. It's a great thing to build and have skill for, but also like we talk about like autopilot, right? Like if you're just letting autopilot go and you're not even being aware of it, but once you become aware, it doesn't automatically mean you're grabbing the wheel and taking control. That you could be awake now and aware, but then you could still be letting autopilot um, be behind the wheel. So there's that important step, but that also needs to lead to then the next thing. So I really like how you put that because that's really, really important. As I was traveling and we talked before we were recording, I was like thinking of the pilot who can't just wake up and be like, oh, okay, like there's the autopilot. Like, no, I gotta suddenly take control to um, make this go a different course, make this go a different direction. So I really, really
Mm.
appreciate that. Okay, so we are um any any final thing you want to share with the audience, whether it's about your book or some other work that you have. I know you talked about being a speaker and some future things coming up with that, but anything else you want to let audience members know um as we do like our final takeaway here?
I would just say the thing I love other than speaking in this version of who I am today is hearing from people. And whether that's you DMing me on Instagram saying, I heard you on this podcast, this thing you said about that really helped, or I have a question, or if you go to my website, which is drsamanthahart.com, on every single part of the site, whatever it is you're reading about me and learning about me, there is an option towards the bottom to book a free call with me. And I get so much out of that. I mean, imagine writing your whole life story, right? You just laying it all out there on the line in the hopes that some random person in some random part of the world picks it up and feels hopeful. So when I get to actually hear from you, it means everything to me. Whether or not you ever work with me is totally secondary. So I would just urge the listener, if you feel compelled by whatever you heard, to please, please get in touch with me.
I like that. There's not everyone does that either. Like I know some people that say, "Hey, reach out to me, send me messages on um however you can," and you can tell because they're individuals like you who really people who don't want to respond to DMs and to do all that like are not usually giving out that message. They're usually like, "Yeah, go to my website or find this." But for audience like for guests that I've had who tell me, "Hey, reach out to me, like contact me, find a way." I've heard a lot of great responses from people who have done just that, and they do connect with you. They do get to hear from you. It's not an empty invitation. It's one that's waiting for someone to show up, and that's really important too because we always talk about resources and people getting care and call a number, visit this, and we know like that is tough. Like that's not the easiest thing to do. So the one thing we can do is make sure when we give those messages that we do respond, that we do answer back. So when that's your final takeaway, that's so important. I think that's really great to hear someone to put themselves out there too to let people connect with them, even if it might be one time or it might be first of many, um, but that you are willing to do that. So I really, really want to thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's just my calling.
Yeah. So we will have links to your website for listeners, and we will have ways that they can connect with you as we discussed and to find where to get your book. But overall, it took us a little bit of coordinating, but I really, really enjoyed our conversation today, and everything that we discussed was extremely beneficial. And I think audience members are going to get a lot from your book, our discussion, when they learn more about you. And I can't thank you enough for making this work.
Thank you so much. I had such a good time talking to you.
Thank you.